He laughs at fear, afraid of nothing. He does not shy away from the sword. He cannot stand still when the trumpet sounds.
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. Today we're going to be talking about the Billings Mustangs in the Independent Pioneer League. They, of course, play in Billings, Montana. Later on in this episode, I will be speaking with Nick Matarese of the Barn Creative. He's the designer who created the brand. And, of course, Dan Simon of Studio Simon will be here with one of his Studio Simon stumpers. Right now, I am so pleased to welcome to the Baseball by Design podcast, Matt Allen, who is the general manager for the Billings Mustangs. Matt, good morning. How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk about this brand. I've been to a Billings Mustangs game one time as part of a Montana road trip with my children. But this is a classic brand. It's been recently updated over the course of a couple of years, and we'll talk with Nick Matarese in the next segment about the work that he did on this rebrand. But in general, what do Mustangs mean to Billings, Montana? How come a team in Billings, Montana is called the Mustangs?
You know, that was quite a while before I was here. I don't know what they were thinking in 1947. It was just a fan vote. They just put it out there to the fans, and that was the one that won.
All right.
The top two contenders with the Mustangs were the Bronx and the Doggies. The next two were the Mavericks and the Vigilantes. And then just some of the other names that people submitted were the Colts, the Champs, the Chiefs, the Rimrockers, the Sugar Beaters, Sage Hens, the Buffs, and the Plainsmen.
Those are some fun names there. It sounds like some great fodder for some throwback nights or some what could
Yeah.
have been or something like that. So you have been out west. This is you're just through your first year as general manager of the Mustangs. You were in Grand Junction before that, which is in my home state of Colorado, but pretty far out west on the western slope, they call it, the other side of the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah.
But in general, in this part of the country, there's a significance to Mustangs, they evoke a very sort of Western feeling. From your perspective, being the general manager for a team called the Mustangs, what is that relationship, of sort of Mustangs and the American West to you?
I think it just kind of sums up the American West perfectly. I mean, everything from the cattle drives back in the day from Texas up to Montana. And I mean, there's tons of rodeos here all summer, and ag's one of our biggest industries here in Montana. So Mustang just kind of, like you said, sums up the American West pretty great.
It's a pretty serious logo, sort of a straightforward logo in a world of minor league baseball wackiness. As general manager, do you look at that and think, we should be involved in the wackiness of minor league baseball, or is it more? I mean, obviously, with the recent redesigns that I'll be talking to Nick about, is it more like no, we're a serious baseball team and these are professionals?
I mean, yeah, we obviously like to think of ourselves as professionals and serious, but minor league baseball does have that goofiness to it. It's just so classic here and just so ingrained in our history of Billings that, we like to keep it pretty straightforward.
There's a bunch of new marks out there that started, Nick did those in 2022. And then obviously the primary logo was just updated. How are they being received by the local community?
Really great. You're always going to hear a little bit of bad feedback from anybody on anything, but for the most part, it's all been good. Getting a lot of compliments on it. I mean, when we released it, I think I had, a bunch of emails from sponsors and season ticket holders and stuff like that saying that they really liked it. And I mean, got to be happy about that.
I think, obviously that negativity is going to pop up anytime there's any change, right? Like it doesn't matter what the change is. The Mustangs did have some sort of cartoony logos in the past. They had, starting in 2006, a sort of horse character swinging a baseball bat. In your short time with the team so far, do you get people coming at you for like, hey, when are we gonna get that logo back, or when are we gonna have a throwback night with those logos?
Not too much. They did a throwback night a handful of years before I got here. with the old 80s jerseys. And that one comes up quite a bit. People want to see those again. But we try to use all of the logos, even bring back those old ones and put them on a hat or put them on a shirt every once in a while, kind of keep them relevant.
One of the decisions you all made in the new logo set was to incorporate like geological features, hyper local things, and so often you see in minor league baseball teams are trying to create things that are going to like sell to all 50 states, and they put a map on their Twitter and all that. Obviously, some of the decisions you made were to focus on the local community and the local landmarks and things that would really only have a significance to people who knew that area.
Yeah, I mean, our fans in this community take care of us so well. I mean, we want to, give them something that represents them and, this area as a whole. And, the people in all the other states that, might see our logos or buy something or what have you, it's not as important as our people here.
Is there a particular mark that you're seeing in the team store that the fans like the most?
The one that has the state outline with the horse in the middle of it, I'm sure you've seen that one.
Yeah.
That one does really well, just because if I had to guess, people are proud of being from Montana and proud of living here, and that the state outline means a lot to them.
When the Missoula Paddleheads released their logo set, they had some Montana state outlines, and they were, they're saying, we want to be Montana's team. Obviously, there are three other teams, besides Missoula, including you all, and then of course the Great Falls Voyagers, and then the Glacier Range Riders way up north there. This obviously, this logo with the Montana outline staking your claim to being Montana's team. How do we decide who's Montana's team here?
I don't know if we have to. We can all I think we can all believe that we are, and just kind of go with that. We all play pretty nicely together, so obviously rivalries on the field and that sort of thing, but we're all on the same team at the end of the day. I'd love to say we're Montana's team, but I'm sure they'd all say the exact same thing.
One of the logos here is uses the nickname Magic City. What is Magic City, and how come that the team has that mark there?
So that's just a nickname for the city. It always kind of has been somewhat popular around town. There's some companies named Magic City, such and such. But we just got those jerseys last year and wore them. We had a plan to wear them every Friday night, but they were our team's lucky jersey. We kept winning, so they kept wearing them all the time. And those things were a hit. The fans loved the Magic City jerseys, and we're getting a bunch of shirts and some replicas and stuff like that, and because people liked them.
The the Pioneer League to me is a lot of fun. We have where I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, we have the Northern Colorado Owls with a Z, and I've been to a number of their games. Just mentioned I took the Montana road trip. I have thrown out a first pitch at an Idaho Falls Chuckers game. That was fun. The Pioneer League, though, is obviously this is a league that used to be short season single A. It used to be affiliated. Now it's one of the Major League Baseball partner leagues, most noted for the tie-breaking knockout round home run contest. If the game is tied after 9 innings, still on my bucket list to see a knockout round at a game. It's a fun league, and there's a lot of fun brands in it. Obviously, the Rocky Mountain vibes are not that far from me. That's another fun one. We were talking off air about the two new teams out in the Oakland area, the Ballers and the High Wheelers. But you've been in the Pioneer League with other teams, most notably in Grand Junction, then the Rockies, now the Jackalopes. What is it about this league and this part of the country you think that really draws fans to these games, and how different is it than being in like an affiliated minor league team?
It's just our history. The league's been around. This is its 85th year. They're part of all these communities, all these teams. We have third generation season ticket holders and that sort of thing. It's just part of the community, regardless of level or affiliation or anything like that. It's just part of summer here.
Matt, this is awesome. Thank you so much for jumping on and talking about the name here. We're going to talk to Nick Matarese of the Barn Creative about the work that he has done. In the meantime, look forward to getting back to Billings and catching a game there.
Let us know if you're coming back. We'll have you throw out a pitch again.
I love it. That sounds perfect. It's like 7 hours to get there from Fort Collins. I can make it happen.
Heck yeah.
All right. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Paul.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I am so pleased to have on the podcast for the very first time designer Nick Matarese, who is with the Barn Creative in Delaware. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing really well. So glad to finally have you on the podcast here. This is, I've covered your work on sportslogos.net before, but we obviously have not had the chance to speak in person. So this is a really fun update that you've done for this team. You were charged with updating this brand, and it's happened sort of in two stages. There was a series of logos unveiled in 2022 that you created that sort of updated everything, kind of everything except for their primary. They had like a roundel that was a primary.
Yes.
And then just recently, you sort of completed that suite with a new primary mark that replaced the old primary that had been around since like 2006.
Yes.
First of all, that's sort of an interesting approach that the team took to how they took those steps. I'm curious about that from your perspective as a designer.
Yeah. I mean, well, when we came to it, it was kind of like a funny way how we got, down that rabbit hole. But they really wanted to get away from what we would say kind of like the classic look of minor league baseball and like those, the cartoony, overly fun things. So at first it was more kind of like a mascot badge. And I think that's why it wasn't necessarily the primary out of the gate, but more of like, can we make a little bit more of a serious mascot logo? And then that conversation just kind of kept rolling and rolling and rolling, and it turned into a full suite of a brand, but we kind of stayed away from what we called their historical mark, which was their primary. And then, yeah, essentially it went over so well with the local community that Dave Heller, owner of the team or owner of Main Street Baseball, it reached back out and said, hey, can you, we loved everything you did last year. Can you kind of make the primary match all the work you did last year?
Sure.
And that's kind of how yeah, you're right though. It's a little opposite of how we're usually approached, but we're happy with the work. So it is what it is.
So that 2022 suite of logos had the sort of first appearance of this very fierce, like explicitly fierce looking horse or Mustang.
Yes, Mustang, yeah.
Which replaced a more sort of a powerful image, but like a more sort of generic silhouette of a Mustang that was in their old logo. So that logo, there was a 3/4 angle of it, and then there was a front facing angle of it. The 3/4 angle of it has a geographic landmark sort of nestled in the neck of it there, and then the front facing one is occupying the entire state of Montana. That obviously was a challenge for you as a designer. How did you approach incorporating those multiple elements into single marks like that?
Yeah, I mean, whenever we approach a branding project in reality, truthfully, my background is more kind of like coming out of school. I always thought I was going to go into like advertising rather than design. The creative world, most people just kind of loosely call themselves creatives now, but my brain was actually going into advertising. So whenever we're approached for a new branding project, my brain thinks about things like target audiences and archetypes and things of that nature, things that kind of about selling a product before quote unquote making something look cool. So our research really kind of digs down into what makes a fan base, we'll just loosely call fan base or region or anything like that, kind of tick. And the rim rocks were something that we just knew had to be in there. It just screams Billings. And that was actually the conversation we had with Billings. They wanted a Billings Mustang, not just a Mustang. So knowing we needed to incorporate something local was at the forefront. And there was a bunch of things that, we also either didn't make the cut or, it's a little too subtle or things of that nature. But when we started making a darker horse, we realized we can start hiding things in the shadows. So it was like bringing all those ideas together is more of kind of say a traditional design process of just, keep designing, keep making happy accidents and seeing where it goes, but having a greater concept in mind.
The first thing that I want to talk about is a really noticeable shift, and this is true in both the entire suite now, the sort of looking at it as a collective, the 2022 marks and the ones that were just released recently, the shift to a much fiercer mascot, sort of from a generic feeling mascot to one that is explicitly fierce. To me, that comes across most in the eyes, especially that sort of like all white eye there.
Mhm.
But I'm curious, when you set out to create an animal that is really fierce like that, do you have a starting point? Like how do you go about, taking a majestic animal and making it, sort of almost like not demonic, that maybe is a little over
But
the
definitely
top,
mean.
but mean.
Definitely, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
he's
mean.
mean.
Yeah.
He's a mean Mustang.
Yes. I'd say truthfully out of the gate, it is just photography. You spend days, if not an entire week, just looking at photography or muscle diagrams and skeletal diagrams and what's the difference between, a wild Mustang in Billings rather than, wherever. You kind of really dig down into like, where did those horses come from? Like, as we stated before, I'm from Delaware. The horses that are in Billings are actually the same horses or the same genetic, ancestry or whatever as the horses on Assateague Island, that were brought here and then essentially went wild. They were eventually domesticated and then they weren't, something happened. I forget the backstory. It's been 2 years, but now they're a wild breed of animals. So you just do insane amounts of research into musculature and photography and what happens when the light hits this. And it's not as elegant as it sounds that, oh, we're going to make this crazy, whatever. It's more about understanding, I'd say, the animal for something like this. And I think that really kind of comes down to, what a horse is and you know what a horse isn't. So if you do it wrong and you get the musculature wrong and people are going to notice. It's like if you write a word and you write the letter E backwards, people are going to notice. So you've got to make sure that those things are right. Even if they're exaggerated and cartoonish, that needs to be correct or people will kind of go, what is this?
So it's obviously meant to be a lifelike horse, which comes through, right? Like it's not a cartoon character as you're describing.
That was key for them. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. No. It does not, it does not feel like the New Orleans baby cakes. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for these Easter eggs here. First, let's talk about what some of the Easter eggs are here, and I'll tell you what I've noticed, and then you can tell me what I'm missing because I'm sure I'm missing plenty. The Billings rim rocks that we've already talked about here in the primary logo. It looks like the Billings rim rocks are over the word Billings there, but they're also in the horse in the sort of same fashion that they were in the 2022 logos and the sort of horse head there. I'm seeing the mane of the horse is mountains.
Yes.
You obviously have in Montana. So I'm seeing other shapes here, but I don't know which of them,
You've got the big ones.
I got the big ones. Okay.
Yeah, you got the big ones. More about the rim rocks. That was the one that we definitely wanted to drive home. The mountains are definitely like, yes, there's a subtle mountain and everything. And the one is actually the star in his neck on the new primary. That is actually pulled directly from the Billings flag. So if you look at the Billings flag, it actually has the rim rocks and the star right in it. So it's kind of almost a representation of the Billings flag right on the horse itself.
That is very cool. I saw that star there and I'm like, I bet you that's something.
Yeah, that's something. That's something.
From your perspective as a designer, what is the value of Easter eggs? I mean, the sort of classic one is like the arrow and the FedEx logo, right? Like everyone talks about that.
Yes.
And then I've gotten the question so many times, like after I point that out, and people who haven't seen it, which is fewer and fewer people now.
Yeah.
They're like, that's cool, but so what? And
Mhm.
so from a design perspective, details that exist on that sort of secondary level, because I'll admit I didn't see the mountains until I went looking, and then I saw them and I
Yeah.
was like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So from your perspective as a designer, like what do you see as the value for those sort of second and tertiary level details like that?
Yeah, what I always say is they're there if you know you're there. It's kind of they're there for the initiated, you're in the fraternity kind of concept. So we've had a lot of people around here say, "Oh, what's that thing in his neck?" Well, those are the Billings rim rocks.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
What's that? I don't expect anyone from the greater Philadelphia area to have any idea what that is.
Right.
But if you're from Billings, it's this, as we kind of stated before, uh, this is our Mustang.
Mhm.
You know, the idea of it's yours.
Mhm.
It's only for the people who see it. It's for that local community.
Mhm.
And I actually think those are the things that make a brand, specifically in sports, go from, oh, that's a cool logo to selling out of merchandise. Like that's the difference. And especially in the minors, that money means a lot.
Yeah.
So making a community absolutely fall in love with the detail
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
what gets it for me.
Yeah.
That's like the thing that keeps me up at night. And I kind of say it's not for everyone,
Right.
and that's the interesting trick for me. If you see it, awesome.
Yeah.
If you like it, great. If you're
Yeah.
from that area and it makes you fall in love with it, then we win. Like
Yeah.
that's everything for me. It's about the local community. I don't need everyone to see it.
Yeah.
I need it to look good on its own. And then the people who see it and the people who are really who it's for, I want them to fall in love with it. Like that's the difference for me. I think that's what those secondary levels are. It's going from like to love.
Yeah.
The classic, like now I can't unsee it. Those are the things where like logos don't go anywhere forever.
Yeah.
The H in the Hartford Whalers logo, like, oh, it's cool whale. It's like, oh, but that H is there. And they're like, oh, that's Hartford.
Yeah.
I gotta have this forever now. Yeah, those little details last forever.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there with that, right? Like,
Mm.
seeing the mountains in the main to me are the ones that are just like so understated, but then like once you see it, it's just like, oh yeah, that's very cool. You've touched on something else that I was asked recently, and so I was asked on the Earned Fun Average podcast about the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs
Mhm.
recently, and they're always doing these alternate brands.
Yeah.
And their salute to Philly this year is going to be about the Mummers.
Yes.
And so, and I think that's amazing, right? Because like
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
connection to that place, and I used to watch the Mummers parade with my grandmother, and so like, all of that just like really struck a chord with me. What the guys on Earn Fun Average asked me was, what goes into the decision of trying to do something hyper local like that that's going to, appeal to the community? Like you say, if you're in Billings and you see these rim rocks in a logo, that creates a connection, right? From between the local community and the local team.
Yes.
So many minor league teams now, I think, are trying to create brands that appeal to the larger masses, right? And
Mhm.
not that there's a problem with that. That's a specific approach. But I would think as a designer, the team comes to you either with, we want to sell something that's going to sell to all 50 states,
Yes.
or we want to create something that is going to create a connection to this hyper local connection to our community. I'm sure you've done both, right? Like I'm sure you've
Yes.
had approaches.
100%.
Is there one that you enjoy more as a designer? Is there one that is easier to
Yeah.
approach?
I like the hyper local
Yeah.
um because you can just dig deeper into the details. The the I'll say global ones
Mhm. Mhm.
are they can be both easier and harder. You don't have to worry about a very specific, like, oh, this isn't tied to them so much, and you just kind of make something a little bit more that just like looks cool.
Right.
Um, and sometimes like the detail is a little easier to just, quote unquote, like that Easter egg. It's like,
Right.
well, we just got to make it a lot more obvious. It
Right.
doesn't need to be that minutia. But I like the hyper local, and the hyper local can just be like what we're saying, Philadelphia. That's not
Uh-huh.
that,
Yeah.
that's not super hyper local. The
Right.
greater Philadelphia area is kind of a big area. But to me, it really gives you the ability to kind of like go down the rabbit hole. And as a designer, I can understand that, that a team might be like, yeah, it's a little too hyper local. We worry about, merchandise sales and things of that nature. That's all business decisions that need to be made. But for me, it's about making those connections rather than quote unquote just making something look cool. I don't want to just make, oh, it's a really cool skull logo, like, oh yeah, everybody has that. I
Right.
don't want that.
Yeah.
My joke is I have two goals. I want a high school to steal the logo. Like that's my goal. That I want someone to think it's so cool
Yeah.
that a high school 7 states away has now stolen the logo, and you've got to send a cease and desist and all that stuff. But my other side on top of that is like I want the Easter egg to still be in that logo and then not know it. I
Very
want
cool.
that to be like, oh yeah, we stole your Mustang logo. Hey, great, you got the rim rocks in it, buddy. It doesn't make any sense, So like
The
that's
Iowa
kind of
rim
always
rocks.
my goal. Yeah, like that's always my goal, to make something that's looks good for everyone, but
Yeah.
the Easter egg is subtle enough that if you're not from there, you might not understand what it is.
Right.
So for me, it's that do the hyper local, and the buy-in is greater. Um, for me personally, I find it easier to design just because you can go down the rabbit hole. You can
Yeah.
become a local and see those little details.
The last question I wanted to ask you before I let you go here was in the primary logo that was just unveiled. It's interesting that the scale shift that happens, right? Like you go from a horseshoe
Yes.
to the horse to the geographic feature. So like it's completely inverted, right? Like the smallest thing is the
Yes.
biggest in the logo, and then it's inverted. But the type in this logo, it has a very sort of Western saloony feel about it.
Yes.
I'm curious. Was obviously, I think that intent is pretty obvious. But when you were creating this type, were there other considerations that you were thinking about?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that was actually, I would actually pull that from the branding before. We
Okay.
did a lot of the typography from that, and that is, beyond going down the rabbit hole of what is Western, and how Western, and that's not Western enough, and all of that kind of minutia that every designer has to deal with of, where's that sweet spot that we're going to. For the new primary, it was actually an interesting exercise that we wanted to be able to disassemble it. So all of those pieces can be taken apart, and they actually have them as separate elements. So the Billings Mustangs with the rim rocks in the background is actually its own element. Like that can actually be removed, and they can use that for merchandise. There's a full-bodied Mustang that whole, like where the back legs can be seen, that could be removed. And then obviously the horseshoe is just like their M logo flipped over.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a key part for me. Like, how do we make it, but how do we make it so that you can kind of make like an open face sandwich kind of thing? Like, oh, this can be its own element. This can be its own element. This can be its own element. Kind of allowing them to get more legs out of one mark, essentially. Because we all know it's minor league baseball. It's not. This isn't the Yankees. This isn't. They don't have unlimited funds. So how can we make this for them a lot more usable? And that's kind of was really the goal. Like make it match the new brand and make it as usable as possible. So those things like typography were okay. We can't reinvent the wheel here. We made all of those kind of like the brand guidelines from our last go at this. Just keep it simple. Use what's there, have a little bit more flow to it, and just call it a day.
All right, I lied to you. I said that was my last question,
It's
but
fine.
then
One of the things forever. It's a problem.
One of the things that's been in my head as we've been having this conversation is understanding how different this part of the world felt to me when I moved out here. I'm curious to know, as a designer creating a brand that's meant to evoke a place, is that a challenge for you being in Delaware, being, in a place where you have Wawa in the Atlantic Ocean, and you're meant to be evoking a place that has, wild horses and these geological features?
Yeah.
Is that a challenge for you?
It is. I just love that you started with Wawa. That, that it is, but I'd actually say this goes back to schooling. And I'm probably going to butcher this quote, but it's one I love. That the goal is to be able to look in a mirror and not see yourself,
Hmm.
but like see all your features and see all of those things. So it's really a skill that I find most creatives need to master, the ability to go do all your research, whether you can be there in person, whether you have to do it all online, filling out questionnaires, trying to get management and locals to fill out questionnaires, and really the classic, like putting yourself in their shoes, really kind of understanding a community. And I feel that's a learned skill over time. So it is a challenge. Absolutely, it's a challenge. I think it's something that the older you get and the more skilled you become, I mean, you could go through the list of, massively skilled designers, and they're really good at that.
Mhm.
They're really good at looking at an area and saying, that's unique. That's them. This is those little details without getting cheesy, like, oh, Philly, everything's a cheesesteak, everything's a cheesesteak, but like, how do you make that feel you get walking down, Little Italy, and like that understanding, like if you do research into the greater Philadelphia area, you're never going to find Scrapple. It's not going
Right.
to come up in Wikipedia,
Right.
but those little details are the things that you need to, head on a swivel for when you're
Yeah.
doing your research. And it is hard. Yes.
Yeah.
That's why the research part is the hardest part in reality.
Yeah.
But I find that when you do it right, the design part's actually pretty easy. You
Mm.
know all the answers. It's if you have created a roadmap, it's this is important. It needs to be this. And this little detail taken from your road signs that everyone has
Right.
is, and everyone will see it.
Yeah.
That's the skill that I really feel separates. I just say, early stage, or, juniors from seniors, and,
Right.
seniors from, directors,
Yeah.
is understanding that, seeing it, and being able to pull your own personal self out of yourself and
Yeah.
placing yourself right there.
Yeah.
So I feel the answer is yes, it is hard,
Mhm.
but it is a learned skill,
Yeah.
that I find, again, you see in the really good people. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the importance of avoiding, I mean, you sort of laughingly threw out the cheesesteak there, right? Like avoiding the stereotype, right? Like,
Yes.
and
But if you're in Philly, I mean, you could say like the cobblestone streets in
Mhm,
Old
mhm,
City,
mhm.
like that is more Philly than the Liberty Bell, like
Yeah.
to someone walking around the city,
Yeah.
like this street, that
Right.
tight corner that, you look down and go, that's an alley. Why is it so small? Because that was for horses. It wasn't for
Right.
car. Like
Right.
that's those details, especially in like, colonial East Coast.
Sure.
Those are the things that make up a city.
Right.
Yeah, not the first thing that shows up on Wikipedia. And that's the challenge, try to get the things that make sense to a local community or a fan base without being cheesy.
And besides, the best sandwich in Philly isn't even a cheesesteak; it's the pork and broccoli rabe. So, and I'll
Mm.
die on that hill.
Oh man, yeah, there you go.
Nick, thank you so much. This has been it's been a great pleasure to get to chat with you and get to know you a bit, and hope to
Indeed.
have you back on the podcast again. In the meantime, where can people find the Barn Creative, or you online, social media, that sort of thing?
That would be the way to do it. Our Instagram is usually our best place. We share a lot of kind of behind the scenes and things that didn't make the cut and all that, which is just at the Barn Creative. Websites, thebarncreative.org. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you next time.
See you again.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to Dan Simon, my friend, who is here with one of his Studio Simon Stumpers. Not only my friend, but designer extraordinaire, creator of so many great minor league baseball logos. Dan, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning to you, Paul. I am, as always, fantastic.
You
The
are
weather's
always.
not, but I am.
It is drizzly and gray where you are. It's drizzly and gray where I am. We're talking about the Billings Mustangs, the horse-based brand up there in Montana, very Western feeling. We're here to talk trivia about, who knows, Billings, rock formations, horses. Curious to see where we're going to go.
Okay, well, the Billings Mustangs were founded in 1948 by Billings native Bob Cobb, one of the greatest rhyming names of any minor league baseball team owner. Now, Bob Cobb had already made a name for himself elsewhere, specifically in Hollywood. He owned the Hollywood Stars of the Pacific Coast League. He not only owned them, he founded them. Now, they were called the Hollywood Stars, and they had Hollywood stars that played an important part in the founding of the team, as the shareholders in the Hollywood Stars included actual Hollywood stars such as Gary Cooper, Gene Autry, Bing Crosby, etc. And as a matter of fact, a number of those people also were shareholders of the Billings Mustangs when Bob Cobb founded them. But Bob Cobb had done things prior to founding the Hollywood Stars. And so with that in mind, our studio Simon Stumper today asks, which of these famous Hollywood landmarks did Bob Cobb own? Was it A, Grauman's Chinese Theater, B, the Brown Derby Restaurant, or C, the Hollywood Bowl?
So I have varying degrees of familiarity with those. I've been to Los Angeles a handful of times, and this may warrant a forehead slap here, but when you first asked the question, before you listed the possibilities, before you listed my multiple choices there, the thing that jumped into my head was the Chinese Theater. And I don't have any way of sussing, except for it seems like, a restaurant seems like a likely thing for someone to own. But because the Chinese Theater jumped into my head when you asked the question, before you even gave me the multiple choices, I am sticking with that. Sussing has not been doing any good for me when I don't know the answer. So I'm going to go with my initial instinct, the Chinese Theater.
Okay.
Whenever you say okay like that, it means it's wrong. Okay means wrong.
Correct. You're right about that. You were wrong about your guess. For the edification of your listeners, if they might be confused by it being called Grauman's Chinese Theater, it's now called Mann's Chinese Theater, but originally was Grauman's Chinese Theater when it kind of became famous. And so it's still there. It's still a destination right there and it's been a while since I lived in Los Angeles. So it's either on Hollywood Boulevard or it's got to be on Hollywood Boulevard, not Sunset Boulevard. Could be on Sunset, but I think it's Hollywood Boulevard.
Now that you say that, though, I wonder if a better guess might have been if it had been called Cobb's Chinese Theater. Maybe that would have been a better guess. little bit of who's buried in Grant's tomb here.
Yes. So no, it was not Grauman's Chinese Theater. I couldn't tell you who owned it back then, but I could tell you the Mann Corporation or whatever that is, they now own it. And I don't know who owns the Hollywood Bowl, but whatever, not important to this question. But what is important is that the correct answer is the Brown Derby Restaurant. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Brown Derby Restaurant, which would be understandable because it no longer exists, but it was truly a Hollywood landmark. And it was for a number of reasons. One was it was a place where the stars would go. And if you went to dinner there, you were very likely to meet a Hollywood star. He had two co-owners too, but he was one of the owners. I don't know, in the 1920s or 1930s. So it goes back that far. And one of the other reasons why it was so famous was the building itself was what falls under the category of you architects would out there listening would know of novelty architecture. It's architecture, it's buildings that look like the product one can purchase in that building. For instance, a building shaped like a milk bottle that sold milk, I've seen ones where I've seen shaped like an ice cream cone where you can buy ice cream, et cetera, et cetera. And this one was shaped like a big brown derby or hat. But here's something that it is purported, and it seems like, according to the internet, this isn't necessarily confirmed, but many people believe that's where the Cobb salad originated, named after Bob Cobb. So that's a connection to the Billings Mustangs. Next time any of you have a Cobb salad, think about minor league baseball, because everything comes back to baseball.
Amazing. I did Google a picture of this while you were talking about it. And yeah, it's not large, but I guess it's got like a sort of brown dome on a corner of it. So it's not the whole restaurant that's shaped like it's like almost like the facade. The entrance is shaped like the brown derby hat. And then there's a sign above the facade that is also in the shape of the brown derby hat. And then it says the brown derby on it. It's literally, that old expression, putting a hat on a hat. It's a hat sign on top of a hat building here.
And that type of architecture, it saddens me that it used to be prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
People would build things all the time, like, shaped like dinosaurs and things like that. And there
Right.
are a number of those things that remain,
Yeah.
but there used to be so much more of it. And it's one of my favorite things in the world. And when I lived in Los Angeles, now this goes back to 1984. I moved to Los Angeles in 1984. So wow. I wasn't even thinking about this. We're going back 40 years. But a new restaurant opened shortly after I moved there called The Burger That Ate LA. And it was the entrance of it, like you just mentioned with the Brown Derby, was literally a gigantic hamburger that looked like its mouth was open, about to eat LA. And sadly, that closed while I was still living there. But that was one of the more modern versions of this novelty architecture, like somebody's still doing that. But if I ever have some kind of business where it makes sense where I get my own plot of land, I'm going to make it in the shape of something that relates to what I'm selling, like a big baseball cap or something like that.
Like a big pencil. This one of the things that really bugs me about this is one of my little design peccadillos here, is that the sign, the Brown Derby, right above the door, and the sign that is over the actual restaurant are completely different colors, different typographic styles. Just, it's like two different brands for this one restaurant. And this is something that what I think of when I say this now is the Treasure Island Casino in Las Vegas on the Strip does the same thing. They have two completely different brands, one on the building and one on the sign in front of the building, and it drives me a little nuts.
There ought to be a law.
There ought to be. Dan Simon, thank you so much once again for bringing one of your Studio Simon Stumpers and all of this ancillary information as well. This is this is the real meat of these Stumpers segments, is the additional information that you bring to each one. So thank you for all of that. Thank you for the work that you put into these. And we will see you, as always, next week. And we'll see you online on your Instagram page, which is at @studio_Simon.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to coming right back here next week with more ancillary information.